wedding should have started already. 14 guests sat in absolute silence inside a private suite at the Aladdin Hotel in Las Vegas. The flowers were perfect. The cameras were waiting. The judge checked his watch for the third time, but the groom was missing. Behind a locked door, Elvis Presley stood alone. His breathing was uneven. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. For the last 8 years, the world had believed this moment was inevitable. Newspapers had called it the greatest love story in American entertainment. Fans imagined a fairy tale that had survived distance, fame, and time. They were wrong. Because the man staring into the mirror wasn't afraid of getting married. He was afraid of what marriage would force him to admit. He reached into the inside pocket of his tuxedo and unfolded a small, worn photograph. It wasn't a picture of Priscilla. It was an old family photograph from Memphis. His mother smiled from the center of the frame. Elvis traced the edge of the picture with his thumb, before whispering words no one else would ever hear. "I'm still trying to find you." A sharp knock echoed through the room. "Elvis?" Colonel Tom Parker's voice cut through the silence. "We're out of time." No answer. Another knock. "Every reporter in America is waiting downstairs." Still nothing. The colonel lowered his voice. "If you walk away now, tomorrow every newspaper in the country will destroy you." Those words hung in the air, not because they were emotional, because they were true. For several long seconds, Elvis didn't move. Then he slowly closed his hand around the photograph. There was no smile, no excitement, only surrender. He opened the door. No one noticed the tears that had already dried on his face. The guests smiled as he entered. The cameras flashed. Everyone believed they were about to witness the happiest morning of his life. Almost no one realized they were watching the first chapter of a tragedy that had begun years earlier on a quiet evening in West Germany. West Germany. Several years earlier. The rain had not stopped for 3 straight days. Water streamed down the windows of a rented military house where the biggest entertainer on the planet had become just another American soldier. The applause was gone. The bright lights were gone. For the first time in years, silence had become Elvis Presley's loudest companion. Every evening after duty, he sat alone at an old piano, playing the same gospel melodies his mother had loved. Sometimes he played for minutes, sometimes for hours. Sometimes he never touched the keys at all. He simply stared at the empty chair across the room. His friends tried to cheer him up. Nothing worked. One evening, Air Force officer Curry Grant watched him sitting in the darkness. "You need to meet someone," he said. Elvis gave a tired smile. "I've met millions." Curry shook his head. "No? This one's different." Elvis laughed quietly. "They all say that." Curry leaned against the doorway. "This girl doesn't want your autograph." That sentence finally pulled Elvis away from the piano. "What does she want?" Curry answered without hesitation. "Nothing." That single word stayed with Elvis for the rest of the night. The following evening, as laughter filled the house and soldiers gathered after another long day, the front door opened. A shy teenage girl stepped inside. She wasn't dazzled by fame. She wasn't chasing headlines. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She simply smiled politely. For the first time in years, someone looked at Elvis Presley without looking at the legend first. Neither of them knew it, But that quiet meeting would change both of their lives forever. Graceland looked magnificent from the outside. Tourists imagined it as a palace where music never stopped, where laughter echoed through every hallway, and where dreams came true the moment the front gates opened. But every mansion has rooms the cameras never see. As the heavy gates slowly closed behind Priscilla's car, the silence greeted her before anyone else did. The chandeliers sparkled. The marble floors reflected the afternoon sunlight. Fresh flowers stood in crystal vases. Everything looked perfect. Everything except the people living inside. Elvis welcomed her with the same warm smile that had once made her believe nothing in the world could ever hurt her. "You made it," he whispered. For a brief moment, the loneliness that had followed him since Germany seemed to disappear. They walked through the enormous house together. Every room carried a memory. Every hallway carried expectations. Every door seemed to promise a future that neither of them could clearly describe. That evening, Elvis sat behind the piano. His fingers drifted gently across the keys. The melody was soft, almost fragile. Priscilla stood quietly beside him. She didn't interrupt. She simply listened. When the final note faded into silence, Elvis finally spoke. "Do you ever wish the world would forget who you are?" She looked at him surprised. "The whole world knows your name." He smiled without happiness. "That's exactly the problem." Weeks slowly became months. Life inside Graceland followed a strange rhythm. Some mornings, Elvis filled the house with music. He laughed with friends, played football outside, raced motorcycles, ordered midnight movies, made everyone around him believe he was the happiest man alive. Then, without warning, everything changed. He disappeared into his room for hours. Curtains remained closed. The piano stayed silent. Even the servants learned not to knock. Priscilla began noticing something nobody had warned her about. The louder the crowds outside became, the quieter Elvis became inside. One night she found him standing alone on the balcony. Thousands of lights stretched across Memphis below, yet his eyes looked far beyond the city. "Do you hear them?" he asked. "Hear who?" "The audience." She listened. There was nothing, only wind. "They never leave," he whispered. "Even when they're gone, I still hear them." She didn't know what to say, so she simply stood beside him. Sometimes silence was the only language grief understood. The following months became a cycle neither of them could escape. Concerts, applause, private flights, recording sessions, magazine covers, television interviews. Then another return to Graceland, another quiet dinner, another conversation interrupted by exhaustion. Priscilla tried to make the enormous house feel like a home. She rearranged flowers, cooked favorite meals, filled empty rooms with music. But houses built for legends rarely felt normal. Friends came and went. Managers discussed schedules. Phones rang constantly. Every day belonged to someone else. Very little belonged to them. One rainy evening, Elvis returned home later than expected. His shoulders were tense. His smile had disappeared. He loosened his tie and sat heavily in the living room without saying a word. Priscilla placed a cup of coffee beside him. "You don't have to carry everything alone." He stared into the cup. "I don't even remember what being alone feels like." She frowned. "You are alone." He slowly nodded. "Exactly." The sentence lingered between them long after neither of them spoke. For the first time, Priscilla realized loneliness could exist even in the same room as love. As the seasons changed, so did their relationship. They understood each other better than almost anyone else, yet somehow they struggled to understand themselves. The dreams they once shared began moving in different directions. Priscilla quietly searched for pieces of her own identity. Books, painting, long walks through the gardens, simple moments away from cameras. Elvis noticed, not because he wanted to stop her, because he feared losing the one person who had witnessed the version of him the world never saw. One evening he asked quietly, "Do you ever think about leaving?" She looked into his eyes. Instead of answering, she asked a question of her own. "Do you ever think about staying?" Neither of them smiled. Neither answered, because deep inside, they already knew the truth. Sometimes two people can love each other and still become strangers while living beneath the same roof. Outside, fans continued chanting Elvis's name. Inside Graceland, silence grew louder every single night. And neither of them realized that the quiet filling those hallways would eventually become impossible to escape. The applause never stopped. Every city welcomed Elvis the same way. Thousands of voices, thousands of cameras, thousands of strangers screaming his name as if he belonged to every one of them. Yet every time the final spotlight faded, every time the limousine doors closed, every time the last fan disappeared behind the barricades, he returned to a house that somehow felt quieter than ever. Graceland was still beautiful. The chandeliers still glowed. The fountains still danced beneath the southern sun. But somewhere inside those walls, something invisible had already begun to crumble. Priscilla noticed it first, not because Elvis had changed overnight, because the small changes had been happening for years. Conversations became shorter. Silences became longer. Smiles became rarer. Some evenings they sat together in the same room for hours without saying a single word. The silence no longer felt peaceful. It felt exhausted. One autumn evening, rain rolled across the windows while thunder echoed over Memphis. Priscilla found Elvis sitting alone in the music room. The piano stood untouched. He wasn't playing. He wasn't singing. He was simply staring at the keys, almost as though he had forgotten how. She quietly walked beside him. "You haven't written anything today." He smiled faintly. "Sometimes the songs are still there." He paused. "They just don't know how to find me anymore." She gently placed her hand over his. "You don't have to carry the whole world." He slowly looked at her. "I know." Another silence. "But I don't know how to put it down." Days became weeks, weeks became months. The distance between them wasn't measured in miles. It was measured in words left unspoken. They still cared. They still worried. But love alone could no longer heal everything that life had broken. One afternoon, Priscilla wandered through the long hallway filled with photographs. Concerts, awards, movie premieres, smiling faces, perfect moments frozen forever. She stopped before one picture taken years earlier. Germany, a rainy evening. Two people smiling without knowing how complicated tomorrow would become. She whispered to herself, "We were different then." Behind her, Elvis quietly answered, "So was the world." That night, they sat outside beneath a sky filled with stars. Neither reached for the other's hand. Neither knew what to say. Finally, Elvis broke the silence. "Do you remember the first night we met?" She smiled softly. "I remember being terrified." "I remember thinking," he laughed quietly, "that for the first time in years, someone wasn't looking at Elvis Presley. They were just looking at me." Priscilla looked toward the distant lights beyond the trees. "I was looking at a lonely man, and I was too young to understand why." The wind carried their words into the darkness. Neither realized those memories would become more valuable than all the fame surrounding them. Life continued moving forward. Concerts returned, schedules filled every calendar. The outside world still believed legends lived forever. But people are not legends. People become tired. People become afraid. People grow in different directions. And sometimes, two hearts that once found comfort in each other slowly begin searching for different futures. One quiet morning, after another long night without sleep, Priscilla stood beside the front entrance. A small suitcase rested near her feet. Elvis walked toward her. Neither raised their voice, neither blamed the other. For a long moment, they simply looked at one another. "I never wanted to hurt you," Elvis said. "I know. I just—" He searched for words that refused to come. "I never learned how to stop running." Priscilla nodded. "And I never learned that loving someone shouldn't mean losing yourself." Neither sentence sounded angry, only honest. Sometimes honesty hurts more than shouting ever could. She stepped forward, wrapped her arms around him one last time. The embrace was quiet, gentle, filled with every memory they would never be able to relive. Then she slowly walked toward the waiting car. Elvis remained standing beneath the front porch, watching, not calling her back. Not because he didn't care. Because somewhere deep inside, he understood that love cannot survive if it asks someone to disappear in order to stay. The car disappeared beyond the gates. The mansion became silent once again. Only this time, the silence was final. Years passed. The crowds still remembered the music. The records continued spinning. Old songs found new generations. Children who had never seen Elvis perform still learned every lyric. Time moved forward. Legends became history. But memories refused to grow old. Sometimes people remembered the concerts, sometimes the movies, sometimes the headlines. Yet the moments that mattered most were never witnessed by millions. They happened in quiet rooms, at lonely pianos, during conversations that no cameras recorded. Those invisible moments shaped lives far more than applause ever could. Because fame can fill stadiums, it cannot always fill an empty heart. And admiration from millions can never replace one honest conversation with someone who truly sees you. Perhaps that is why their story continues to fascinate people, not because it was perfect, but because it wasn't. It reminds us that behind every legend is a human being searching for peace, searching for understanding, searching for a place where the spotlight finally fades. The world will always remember Elvis Presley as the king of rock and roll. But beyond the music, beyond the photographs, beyond the history, there remains a quieter story. A story about two lonely souls who met on a rainy evening far from home. For a little while, They helped each other believe that loneliness could be defeated. Sometimes that is enough. Sometimes it isn't. And perhaps the greatest tragedy is not that every love story ends. It is that we often understand its true meaning only after the music has already faded. The stage lights eventually go dark. The audience goes home. The applause becomes an echo. But kindness, shared dreams, and the people who once changed our lives remain with us long after the final curtain falls. That is the part history can never fully capture. And maybe that is the part worth remembering most.